Yeah, thank you. It's about faith. It's all about faith. It's all about faith. It's about our faith. Typically we talk about our faith, and as we know, Hebrews tells us that without faith, it's impossible to please God. So therefore, you need to have faith, right? Well, the one thing that has occurred to me this week, as I have prepared, is that not only is our faith important, but as we go through this study, it's really important for us to recognize how faithful God has been over the ages. And our topic today, of course, is this topic, Armageddon. And I can't think of a more intimidating word than the word Armageddon. In 2 weeks ago, I asked you the question, are you afraid of judgment? Today, I could probably ask you the question, are you afraid of Armageddon? Well, I would think that our faith is pretty much the key of answering that question. And so therefore, if we're not going to be afraid of Armageddon, then we somehow need to have confidence in the faith of God that we have seen over the course of time. So for our prayer today, I'm going to read you the word song. The song is called, He's Been Faithful. It was written in 1989 by Carol Cimbala. Carol Cimbala is the choir director for the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir. She's been doing it for over 40 years. I only recently heard this song, 35 or so years later. You may have heard it. But for our prayer today, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes, and I'm going to read the lyrics to that song. And then at the end of today, we're going to play this song. Okay? So bow your heads, please. In my own suffering, through every pain and every tear, there is a God who's been faithful to me. When my strength was all gone, and when my heart had no song, still in love, he's proved faithful to me. Every word he's promised is true. What I thought was impossible, I've seen my God do. He's been faithful to me. Looking back, his love and mercy I see. Though in my heart I have questioned and I failed to believe, he's been faithful to me. Amen. When my heart looked away, the many times I could not pray, still my God was faithful to me. The days are spent so selfishly, reaching out for what pleased me, and even then God was faithful to me. Every time I come back to him, he is waiting for open arms, and I see once again he has been faithful to me. Amen.
Amen.
Are you who I think you are, back in the back row?
Thank you for putting that.
Yes. You could probably come sing that song for us.
I do all the words.
I have it right here. Okay, there we go. Amen. Faithfulness of God. So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about, and in your mind throughout this time, I want you to think, as your mind wanders, as in I know it's going to, okay, as your mind wanders, think about the faithfulness of God. Now, the thing about today's lesson, okay, chapter 16, verses 12 through 21, I know we got an issue up here, is that Revelation, you have this concept of repeat and enlarge. Okay, he tells the story multiple times throughout the course of the book, and every time he tells it, he adds a little dimension to it, so therefore the reader is becoming more knowledgeable. Well, in this particular section today, maybe just because he's way in the future, he's constantly going into 17, 18, and 19, and coming back and explaining what's going on in 16. Well, if I do that, Terry's not going to be happy with me, because then he's not going to have him teach about next week. I am not teaching next week. So the point is that what I don't want to do is get ahead of ourselves. That means that the things that we're talking about today, we need to rely on from some stories from the Old Testament. So as a little bit of prep before we get into our lesson today, I want to review 3 Old Testament stories. Okay. First one, the plagues of Egypt. You may remember After Moses left Egypt, he's in the wilderness. God comes and taps him on the shoulder and says, hey, I want you to go back to Egypt and I want you to convince Pharaoh to let my people go. Well, Moses comes up with every excuse in the book. He says, I'm old. I'm slow of speech. God says, yeah, I know all that, but go anyway. And he keeps pushing back. God says, look, I'll pair you up with Aaron. He's very eloquent. Go. All right, fine. So Moses goes back to Egypt. He says, I want you to go in there and I want you to get Pharaoh's attention because he's not going to listen to you without a dramatic act. Okay. He goes in, he throws his staff on the ground, it turns into a snake. Pharaoh's not impressed because he gets his magicians to come in and they do exactly the same thing. Right. So Moses leaves. He says, go back. So he comes back. Okay. And he says, okay, I want you to get Pharaoh's attention. I want you to stick your staff into the Nile. It's going to turn to blood. That happened. Well, Pharaoh again wasn't impressed because he brought in his magicians. They did exactly the same thing. So you see a theme here. The bad guys are able to reproduce the things the good guys do for some period of time. He does it again. He comes up with the frogs. Okay. The frogs come in. Same thing happens. Pharaoh summons his magicians. They're able to bring the frogs again. Moses is really getting depressed. God, I'm not having an impact here. He says, go back. He goes back. This time he comes back to gnats. Same drill. Pharaoh brings in his people. They no longer can duplicate what Moses has been doing. You make your way through all those plagues down through darkness, you have exactly the same thing that's happening. The ability for the deceptive practices of the magicians was no longer able to be done. Okay, now we get to the end, okay, and we have the firstborn. God says, this isn't working. Pharaoh's not listening. I'm going to have to really get his attention. And so therefore, I'm going to send an angel through the entire encampment, Israelites and Egyptians alike, and I'm going to kill the firstborn. But here's how you can avoid that. And how you can avoid that is, take the blood from a bull or a goat and put it on the frame. Now, notice to this point, the Israelites have largely been standing on the sidelines. Moses and God have been doing all the work with Pharaoh and all the things that were happening and throughout these plagues. Not every single time does it say that, but in probably 6 or 7 out of the 9, it says that the people were not affected. The people were not affected. But now, all of a sudden, they need to get involved. Okay, and God is preparing them. He says, here's what's coming, but here's how you can avoid it. So they had a choice to make. Do I want to save my firstborn? Well, if I do, I better put my blood on the door. And as you know what happened, the angel came through, and that's what ultimately led to their release. So what's the message here? In summary, for a very brief time, the bad guys were able to duplicate what the good guys were doing. During the time, God's people were protected, but at the end, they had a choice that they had to make to demonstrate their faithfulness in what God was telling them. Put that up on the shelf for a minute. We're going to go to the next one. I think we all know what this one is, right? So Ahab, king of Israel, bad guy, had a very wicked wife. They introduced the worship of Baal. God says, Elijah, I want you to go to Ahab and convince him to stop this. So Elijah goes to Ahab and he says, I'm not going to stop it because that's what the people want. He goes, well, why don't we go up on the mountain and give a demonstration to them and let them have a choice? Okay, so they did that. So Ahab brings the people together. They go to the top of Mount Carmel. And Elijah appeals to the people. He says, here he said, he went before the people and said, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, follow him. The people said nothing. Elijah scratched his head. He goes, wow, maybe I'm not being impactful enough. So he goes back to them. He said, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left. There's 450 prophets of Baal over here. We're going to bring 2 altars together, and whichever one gets fire come down, that will tell you who. They said, okay, we're in. But would you say Elijah was a remnant at that point in time? You had a popular thing going on over here. You have a still small voice over here trying to do the right thing, trying to tell the people you have a choice to make here. And so he's going to have to bring about this demonstration to get through their heads. You know what happened. Now, the interesting thing about this is after the fire came down, oh, by the way, Who says the Bible doesn't have a sense of humor? When the prophets of Baal were doing their thing, spending hours and hours whooping and hollering, Elijah's taunting them. He might be taking a nap. Maybe he went to Starbucks, all those sorts of things. He's taunting them. And that God had to be kind of smiling around. At any rate, I thought that was a bit funny. But of course, when the fire came down from heaven, it was abundantly clear to them who was God. And they said, he is God. Now, a very important point after this. When this whole thing was over, verse 40 in this chapter in 2 Kings says, then Elijah commanded them, seize the prophets of Baal and don't let anyone away. They seized them and he brought them down to the Kishon Valley and they were slaughtered. Okay, what's happening? Two camps, information. The people had to make a choice. When the choice was made, the bad guys were taken care of. Okay. A couple of other notes. This is a map of the upper part of Judea and Samaria up to Jerusalem. The two red arrows, this one points to Mount Carmel, and this one points to the plain of, I think it's called, I can't speak it, but it's commonly called Megiddo. Okay, so you have a valley and then you have Mount Carmel. The plain of Megiddo was a very popular place for war because you can see there's mountain ranges here. So when armies would come down through here and up through here, that would be an intersection point, and there was a lot that went on there. In fact, if you read Ronco's book, he will give you 4 or 5 major battles that took place there. And so this is important information for the future. And oh, by the way, this is a picture taken from the top of Mount Carmel looking down into the Megiddo Valley. And I know at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6 or 7. Yeah, a number of has been there. Terry, Rich, and I and our spouses were there at the same time. Just, if you haven't been to Israel, figure out a way to go, people. It's just absolutely incredible. So that's looking down into the valley. Okay. Last story is one that should be a bit more familiar because we studied it really within the past few months. So this is a rendering of Old Babylon. Okay, as you see, what is running right through Old Babylon? That is the river Euphrates. By the way, Elmer, my understanding is that as human beings, we can go for a time without food, right?
Well, you can't, but I can.
Sorry, I brought that up. What's even more important is water, right? Okay, so I think it's pretty clear to say that this entire city, this massive city that got built, was sitting on one very, very important thing that if it wasn't there, it wouldn't exist, right? Clearly, the water was everything. Everything revolved around the water. So as you know, the Israelites were in captivity there. But before all that happened, God gave them some warnings. In Jeremiah, he says, I'm going to give all of your countries into the hands of my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. All nations will serve him and his son and his grandson. Remember who his grandson was? Belshazzar. There you go. And the nation will serve him until the time for his land comes. Then many nations and great kings will subjugate him. All right, so he's telling you, I'm going to throw you into captivity, Nebuchadnezzar, but his time is going to be short because another king is going to come and take care of him. Who was that? Well, I don't know why I ask you questions when I can't hear what you say. Did somebody say Cyrus? Good answer. All right, thank you. So now that was a conversation God had with him before they went into captivity. Now, when we get to Isaiah, he continues the same theme. He says, who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd and will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, and the temple, and let its foundation be laid. So God telling them, you're going to go into captivity. It's this guy named Nebuchadnezzar. And oh, by the way, you're going to come out of captivity because this guy Cyrus can come in. Now, Cyrus was from Medo-Persia, which was east. So he had to come from the east. He came down the Euphrates, and we all know what happened the night of Belshazzar's feast, don't we not? Okay, I remember I taught that lesson. Breck White was sitting here, and I said, they say that he went and dried up this river. I don't buy it. After I read Revelation, I now buy it. You'll understand that in a second. But legend has it, or proof has it, that he diverted the river and he walked in under the gates, and Babylon went down barely a wink. So Babylon, as mighty as it was, had an Achilles heel, and it was the Euphrates. So the cool thing, the advantage that we have now, and this goes into the faith building experience, is that we have the ability to look back on this and see what happened. And we look at them and we criticize them because they couldn't see it. Well, they couldn't see it from our vantage point. So as we think about all these processes and how we process this through, and particularly as we look into the future, well, how do we look at the future with confidence? We have to see how God has worked in the past. And these are just beautiful, beautiful stories that are going to play in to what we're going to talk about. One final thing that really has nothing to do with our lesson, but I learned this week and I thought it was fascinating. As Doug Batchelor says, an amazing fact. Notice the map on the left. You have Mount Ararat at the top, you have Jerusalem on the left, and you have Babylon on the right. Okay, Mount Ararat. What comes to mind when I bring up Mount Ararat? I don't. Why do I keep doing that? Do you have an answer? Noah's Ark. Thank you. You'd think I would learn, but I can't. Okay, Noah's Ark is landed on Mount Ararat. And there's scriptural evidence that proves that. Genesis 8:4 says, on the 17th day of the 17th month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Now, look at this. On the right-hand side, we've removed all the other stuff. Notice what starts in Mount Ararat and flows down to Babel, which becomes Babylon. That is the Euphrates River. Let that sink in. Is this coincidence? Okay, we have the flood, the ark lands here. No doubt, in my opinion, that's what started the Euphrates River. And guess what happened sometime after Noah is we had this big thing down here called the Tower of Babel, which ultimately became Babylon. The flood begat the river begat evil. Satan is at work. All right, one more thing. I know can we please get to verse 16 in Revelation, chapter 16. We're going to get there. Okay, 2 weeks ago, we talked about this chiastic structure, right? Everything on the left builds up to the middle. The punchline in Revelation, the center of the center, as Pauline calls it, is the final crisis, which is chapter 12. The dragon was wroth with the woman. He's going off to wage war with the remnant of her seed. Chapter 13, he brings in the two beast powers to help him. They form this counterfeit trinity, which is going out to kill the remnant. And then chapter 14, we have the three angels' message, which we know is a cornerstone of our church. So that is the major activities. Now what we're having is we're now on the downside of that, and we hit the seven bowls. And of course, Carla led us through that last week. But I would like to summarize the first 11 verses from chapter 16. So, okay, to set this up. Remember at the end of chapter 14, it was basically a picture of Jesus coming, and he had the sickle that was taking the wheat, and he had the grapes over there going through the wine press. Okay, so then after that, the seven bowls come out. And so what we have here is a loud voice saying, go pour out the seven bowls of God's wrath on the earth. The first angel poured out his swords. The second angel turned the sea into blood. The third angel poured the streams of water into blood. And the fourth angel poured out his bowl in the sun, etc. Bad stuff. The first four plagues were poured out on the followers of Babylon, or the followers of the beast. God's people were largely unaffected. I don't know if they're not affected at all, but clearly the vast majority are not affected. So these plagues are going out. Remember, God's wrath. At this point, God's about fed up. Right? So he pulls out these plagues and they come to the people. Now, the big difference in the fifth angel and the fifth bowl is this. He poured out his bowl on the throne of go ahead, on the beast, okay? And his kingdom was plunged into darkness. People gnawed their tongues in agony and cursed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, but they refused to repent of what they had done. So Let's think about this for a second. The beast, or Babylon at this point, Babylon is the counterfeit trinity. Okay, you got the two beasts and the dragon together. Okay, they have got the support of the nations at this point in time. But what happens when this plague goes out, it is on the throne of the beast itself. So what you have is you have the crumbling of the beast power at the end time. All right, so that takes us to where we are today. Well, that was 30 minutes of history, my apologies. But I had to use Old Testament because I don't want to mess up Terry's lesson next week. Okay. All right, any questions? I'm going to take a drink. Questions, comments? Okay. Your name? James, would you mind reading that really loud, please?
Sure. Revelation 16, 12, 14. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings of the east, from the east.
Thank you. I'm going to go into that pregnant pause and ask you, does anything here sound familiar? Anything you want to make a comment on based on what we just talked about? Raise your hand, otherwise I won't know where you are. Yes, Rich.
Well, I'm halfway through John Pauline's book, Armageddon at the Door, which is another take on Revelation. This is just one of many examples of where the Revelation is back in the Old Testament. It draws parallel lesson, which I had never thought of before. Live all these years, think, well, but it's connected.
Okay. You want to unpack that anymore?
No. But if I did, I'd tell you more than I know.
Well, good. Keep reading. All right. Okay. Great start. Nice springboard. Anybody? Anything else? Yes, sir.
Supposed to be, I mean, the news, they say the Euphrates River is already dry. You know, that's what they say, but
It's already dry.
yeah, that's what they say on the news, but
Yes, Terry.
This is just a symbolic look back to what happened to ancient Babylon when they diverted the river.
Okay. Okay. All right. Great foundation. Great addendum. Tim?
And it looks to me like they're preparing them for judgment, like the judgment that came upon the Babylonians.
No question about that.
For certain.
You've got to the conclusion. I'm still in the details.
Story.
I'm an accountant. A, B, C, debits equal credits, you know, okay, bear with me. All right, anybody else? Remember the story, remember the picture that I just showed you, Babylon? Okay. Had this. Right, what was that? Okay. And what happened to the Euphrates River? It dried up, okay, Babylon fell. So the angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates and its water dried up. So Terry's right. This is looking back on what happened. Now let's look forward, because this is looking forward, is it not? This is an apocalyptic prophetic book that's looking forward. So therefore, that symbolic action, okay, must mean something else in the future. So the question would be, does anybody read Ronco's book? What does the Euphrates River symbolize in prophetic language? I want to make a smart aleck comment, but I'm not going to. Okay, anybody? Yes.
The way being prepared for destruction.
Could be. Okay. The Euphrates River represents the support system for end time Babylon. Remember, end time Babylon is a spiritual phenomenon. Okay, but in order for the spiritual phenomenon to be advanced in the world, it has to be supported by vehicles. Those vehicles are governments and other secular powers. Okay, so there's a group of secular powers that are supporting this end time trinity in doing what it's going to do, which is battling and trying to kill the people of God. So what's happening here is something is happening that is going to cause that support system to dry up or to crumble. Make sense? Anybody want, well, no, don't debate it because we can't debate it. But all right. So now why did that happen? The angel poured out his bowl to the throne of the beast, and his kingdom was plunged into darkness. Okay, think about this. Your political infrastructure was in love with this counterfeit thing. The political infrastructure now sees this counterfeit thing is crumbling, so they withdraw their support from it. Yes, sir.
Revelation 17 says that the same powers that build Babylon actually destroy it.
Bingo. Come back next week and he'll affirm that point. Absolutely correct.
Go ahead and talk about it next week.
No. Okay, so the Euphrates River is symbolic of the support system. The support system is imploding because of the fifth plague. Now, all of a sudden, it says to prepare the way for the kings from the east. All right, let's look back. Where did the king come from that overthrew Babylon and Belshazzar? He came from the east. That's right. So therefore, it's looking back. Cyrus came in. Now it says we're preparing the way for the kings from the east. So now looking forward, symbolically, kings of the east means typically it is a reference to Jesus, because we all know Jesus says a small cloud appeared in the east and then light went from the east to the west. And so this means, I'll come to you, Rich. This is talking about Jesus' coming. Now, notice that it says, by the way, will somebody please look up Revelation chapter 1 and verse 6? Anybody know? And let me know in a minute. So notice that it says king. Think about that for a second.
The wise men from the east and the three of them resolved.
Yes, but it could be. So what we do know is there's not only one story here. There could be multiple stories here. Okay, who has 1 verse 6? Raise your hand, please. Yes.
He has made us a kingdom of priests for God, his Father. Is that right? All glory and power to him forever and ever. Amen.
So in the introduction, thank you. So in the introduction to Revelation, he is saying is throughout this entire process, he is making his people a kingdom of priests. And so therefore, remember what we've been talking about, the 144,000 before this, the big mountain that are standing on Mount Zion with God. Okay, those kings from the east are now going to be coming in to take over after the implosion of what's happening. I need a volunteer to read. Here, I can hear you. Would you please read 13 and 14?
Sure. Then I saw 3 impure spirits that looked like frogs. They came out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. They are demonic spirits that perform signs, and they go out to the kings of the whole world to gather them for the battle on the great day of God Almighty.
Thank you, Terry. We're leading up to something here. We're leading up, right, folks? Now, the interesting thing about 13 and 14 is that 14 interprets what 13 is, right? It says they are demonic spirits. Well, why did he even put 13 in here at all? If he's going to explain to you, why didn't he just say demonic spirits came out? Well, that's why I told you the story earlier about the frogs. Because remember, the frogs were the last time that the magicians were able to duplicate what Moses had been doing. So also remember, John is writing to a Hebrew, well, he's writing to a universal audience, but at that time he is writing to his cohort of people. Okay, Hebrews, they're going to think like Hebrews do. Well, isn't the Passover the most magnificent thing that they even celebrate to this day? Well, what led up to the Passover? Right? This thing. And so they said, oh, the frogs was the last time that the bad guys were able to be deceptive. So if you think about this, I saw 3 impure spirits that look like frogs. Hint, this is the last time this is going to happen. They came out of the mouth, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. By the way, the false prophet is not a new entity. It's just another name for what we came to know as the land beast. All right. And so the point is that this is the last great deception. Okay, there's been all this stuff happening up to here. The beast and the Babylon power are plunging into darkness. They're reeling. They've lost their support system. Is Satan just going to roll over and play dead? No. Okay. He's going to come forth with this great final act and deception. In fact, Ellen White says in The Great Controversy, page 624, that persons will arise pretending to be Christ himself and claiming the title and worship that belong to the world's Redeemer. So there's going to be lots of things going on here. Today, if I told you, who are you going to choose, God or Satan? Well, that's easy. But when you go into this time, it's not going to be so obvious because these demonic spirits, okay, are going to be impersonating, and they're going to be very, very clever in how they present themselves to the people of that time. It is not going to be abundantly clear. We'll talk about that in a second. That's true.
It's interesting that you're saying that because at the same time, these demonic spirits, they are not coming only from one place. So it's multiple places, like, you know, the 3 that look like frogs came from dragon, from the beast, and from the false prophet. So it's not just one source of deceiveness or one source of demonic spirit. So it's
Universal. He's pulling out every sock in the drawer. You know, right? I mean, he is just doing it. Okay, now we're leading up to, he said, they pulled the kings together and gathered them for the battle of great. Now you would think, okay, the next text is going to say, okay, he pulled them together where? But it doesn't say that. Here's what the next text says. You, Luann.
Look, I come like a thief, blessed in the one who stays awake and remains clothed, so as not to go naked and to be shamefully exposed.
So Rich mentioned John Pauline. He talks about this and he says, did some editor get this wrong? It is completely out of place. But is it? I mean, it is not a part of the flow. Lynette, you're an English teacher. Is it part of the flow? No. Is the Bible messed up? It's not. Oftentimes, if you put something in a spot where it doesn't belong, it gets the most attention. That's what God's doing here. He goes, knock. All this stuff that's happening here, extraordinarily difficult. You as a human being have absolutely no ability to interpret what's right or wrong. Wake up, bad stuff is happening. And that's why he said, look, I'm going to come like a thief. He says it in Matthew, he says it in Mark, he says it in Luke. Paul repeats it in 1 Thessalonians. He comes like a thief, he comes like a thief. Okay, he says, blessed is the one who stays awake and remains clothed. Are you going to tell me what clothes means?
No. I was just thinking that this is a personal dialogue between Jesus and his old friend John, and he probably saw John's horrified, frightened face and felt the need to reassure him.
That's a great point.
I also think that it's kind of, I really see as a continuation of the 14. And I tell you why. Because the 14 ends saying about the day of God the Almighty. So as humans, we always like to know what's coming next. When is the day that you're getting married? When is the day that we are celebrating this? When is the day they're launching this and that? So God knowing that we would be kind of wondering, when is this day? It seems like the next thing that he's telling us is, hey, by the way, stop speculating about what the day is.
Yes.
Because look, I come like a thief.
Oh, fabulous.
Thank
you, Esther.
I see the connection.
Absolutely beautiful.
Going back to referencing the Old Testament, I can see something from Genesis in here. After it says, therefore a man leaves his mother and joins with his wife, it says they were naked and not ashamed.
Hmm.
And so I think
It's not a good place to be, is it?
sounds like it's referencing Genesis.
All right, well, that could be. Well, yes, sir.
The part about being clothed. I think that what it means is that those that do not have the robe of Jesus are not going to be able to, even if you're awake or asleep, it's gonna make no difference. The robe of Jesus is what this is.
Thank you. He has just defined remains clothed. Remains clothed with what? The robe of righteousness. One more thing. Anybody, a scholar in here, what's in Ephesians chapter 6? Ephesians chapter 6, we don't fight against flesh, but we fight against who? Principalities and powers. Is this principalities and powers? And he says, you don't have what it takes to fight this, so therefore you have to put on the armor of God. This is played out in the absolute most important spot that can be played. It's played out all the time, right? I mean, we deal with this all the time, but it's what God's saying with this is that, and by the way, this is not, it's in red letters on my screen. It's also in red letters in the Bible. Okay? This is Jesus speaking personally that says, wake up. You better be connected with me and writing or you're going to be naked.
A thought just came to my mind. If you think about the prodigal son, that's one of the first things. The father didn't know when he was coming, but he was like waiting and waiting. And then the first thing that he does, he covers his son with his robe or whatever the name in English is. And then it's kind of, I cover your sins. You are forgiven. And we are starting a new life. I'm forgetting all about your past. So maybe there's also like a correlation with, God covering us. And it can also mean like, blessed are those who wash their tunic in the blood of the Lamb. So there are like, multiple things in there.
Absolutely. Whatever. Yeah. I mean, whatever works. Okay. So I think we get the point. It's not out of place. It's there by design. So, but now what I want to do is I want to go back to verse 14 and I'm going to continue the natural progression to verse 16 without what we just said. Okay. The demonic spirits perform signs. They go out to the kings of the world to gather them for the battle on the great day of Lord Almighty. Skip 15, go to 16. Then they gathered the kings together to the place in the Hebrew is called Armageddon. Here's the punchline of why we're here today. All this is built up to this. The scary, scary word that here is called Armageddon. Now, a couple of things. Remember, John is writing this in Greek. He steps back, Kelly's opinion, I think, according to what he says, I'm going to give you the Hebrew word because he wants to make sure that they get it. He says that the place in Hebrew is called Armageddon. And by the way, the true pronunciation is Har-Mageddon. Okay, so now your scholars will say, what does the word Har mean? Har means a mountain. Okay, Megiddo, they don't quite know, but there's a linguistic connection to Megiddo. So mountain, Megiddo. It's like, well, okay, there is no mountain, Megiddo. Oh, could this mean referring back to a time and place that we talked about earlier? Which one was that? Mount Carmel. Yeah, I remember Mount Carmel. We're overlooking Megiddo. Megiddo, you have a lot of battles that are taking place. So therefore, they're going to think, oh, there's a battle going on here. We'll talk about whether it's physical or something else. Oh, by the way, there's a mountain nearby, and on that mountain, something took place about 1,000 years ago that was a really big deal, where it was abundantly clear to the people who was worthy of worship. And so therefore, for the Jewish reader of this will ring a bell. The mountain Megiddo refers to Carmel. Carmel, what happened? There was a battle. There was evidence presented in that battle that God was who he was. And then there was a decision by the people who is God. All right, so now. Not sure what's next. Nope. So now the question is, what is we often refer to the Battle of Armageddon. The Battle of Armageddon. This says nothing about a battle. This says we're gathering the kings of the world together in a place in Hebrew that's called. So does that tell you that they're bringing the people of the world to have a big fight? Yes, sir.
Well, this isn't in the Bible, but before on the History Channel, I saw in Mankind a battle of Megiddo, in which the Pharaoh attacked the city of Megiddo, and it's like parallel to the attack of Babylon. The Pharaoh who did it took his army. Now, what I've heard is that the people in Megiddo had the highways blocked to the city because they expected the Pharaoh to take those highways. They took his army through the mountains and came to them as a surprise attack, just like the Persians surprisingly attacked Babylon in the middle of the city.
Okay, cool, interesting, fascinating. All right, so anybody, what do you think? Physical war? How often in today's culture is it like the old days where you have a wall of people over here and a wall, and they come in and they start throwing spears and start fighting? Do we do that anymore? Yeah. No, there's somebody sitting on a computer saying fire a missile here, here, and here, and here. It's happening, right? No way. It's a physical battle. So if it's not a physical battle, then what is it? Raise your hand. You want to tell me. What did you say, Robert?
Spiritual battle.
It's a spiritual battle. Okay, Robert says it's a spiritual battle, and that spiritual battle is taking place where?
Mind.
So would it be fair to say that you're going to stand up and say the Battle of Armageddon is a battle of the mind? Is that fair to say? Yeah. And that battle in the mind, there's a decision that has to take place in that mind about what? Who do you serve? Who do you serve? So everything leading up to this is spiritual stuff that people are seeing. Satan is pulling out all the stops to try to impersonate God, and the people, oh, by the way, they better have their clothes on. You better have your armor on, because if you're going to go and have this battle in your mind, if you don't have your armor, you're done. You will be sucked into the trap of the evil counterfeit. Anybody have issue with that? That's kind of why we're here, isn't it? You look like you're going to say something.
No, you almost wonder if it's going on in our society today.
Ah, ooh, I'm going to read you a quote in a second, which will absolutely nail it on the head. Yes, sir. Talk loud, by the way.
I was thinking that my Armageddon is today, and I need to be closed today, not tomorrow.
Yes. How important is that? What an absolutely fabulous comment. Okay. I think we're clear. Move on. So now we have the last, we've only covered 4 verses right now. We have the last 5 or so here. So you've now had the 6 plagues, the 6 plagues we just saw. The 7th angel poured out his bowl in the air, and out of the temple came a loud voice from the throne. From the throne means it's who is saying it? God. Okay, it is coming from God, and he said, it is done. 3 times that has been stated in the Bible by either Jesus or God. Where was the first one? On the cross, right? It is finished. He's saying it here, and then he's going to say it again in chapter 21. It is done. And everything else there is a description of lots of stuff. Folks, this is a description of the second coming. But we're not done. We still have 17, 18. We still have 5 chapters, so we're not done. Remember, this is a description right now in the context of what we're talking about. Okay, as we get further down in the book, John's going to come back with another description of the second coming based upon the facts that you're seeing at that point in time. So what we have to remember is that Revelation is constantly going forward and going back and going back. He's repeating and enlarging the entire time because he's trying to communicate with us and he's trying to help us understand. Is that a faith-building experience? Is it? Amazing. So that gets us to here. Tom and the gentleman in the back. The Battle of Armageddon, what is it?
In our mind, it's Christ's righteousness versus self-righteousness.
You reading my notes? Is that scary?
Yeah, 'cause
Scary. I won't do justice to this if I try to memorize it or tell you that. So I'm going to tell you exactly what Pauline says in the book that Rich just referenced. He said, it appears that the great battle at the end of history is one that's fought at a personal level. Next 2 sentences, listen very closely, see if there's a hidden message. The principle of Babylon is self-centered religion. Something tempts us all. Anybody guilty of being self-centered? I know you're not, Tom, but the rest of us, guilty as charged. Every single day, right now, I'm being self-centered. No question about it. When we are tempted to put self ahead of others in our spiritual work, we are in a small way taking the wrong side in the cosmic conflict. Think about that for a second. If we are tempted to put self ahead of others in our spiritual work, could that mean you meet somebody and you try to convince them to be an Adventist? You try to convince them to keep the Sabbath. And oh, by the way, they've never heard about Jesus. What is that? That is taking, oh, I'm an Adventist. I'm supposed to proclaim the 3 angels' messages. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to do that. And I'm going to go to you and I'm going to say, you need to keep the Sabbath or you're going to go to hell. What's that doing? That is putting my self-interest as an Adventist that has a proclamation ahead of what God really wants to have happen to the person. That's how I'm interpreting that. When we try to coerce the minds of others to our own spiritual viewpoint, we argue about what these things mean, okay? Because we believe that we're right. I believe Armageddon is a spiritual battle, and I'm going to convince you that I'm right. Really? Is that really what we want to do? He goes, if we do that, we're taking the wrong side in our personal conflict. Finally, he says, the most dangerous Babylon of all is the one that lurks in our own heart. It's exactly what Tom and the gentleman in the back says. We're fighting it every single day. So as we close out the day, and I'm really happy we're tracking early to get ready for this. want to end where we started. Remember, at the beginning, we talked about our faith being important for our salvation, right, Arthur? Well, faith, as we know, is an absolute gift from God. We don't create it. It is an absolute gift, but we can water it and we can seed it. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I think Paul says fight the good fight. of faith.
Yes.
That is basically, for me, that's the Armageddon. This is not an easy fight.
Well, amen, brother.
And so, that passage where it says, Lord, please help my unbelief, resonates with me so much because faith is very. Now we use the term loosely because faith is not just saying faith. Faith does. Faith transforms us. And it's that relationship, is that a relationship we have with Jesus Christ is not a commercial relationship, right? And it's something, but it's a relationship that's transformational. Changes us. This transforms us. And it's on his side.
By the time we get to Armageddon, how many minds will be changed? Because I remember reading Mako, and he said that in spite of all of these things, very few people will make a change, if any. It's kind of over by then.
Really is. Despite the fact that he's been trying so hard. I'm sorry, did somebody else say something?
No, I just said that you've made your decision already, your daily, that's
Yeah.
what it is every day.
Well, Jesus' battle was in Gethsemane. And so that meant that the cross, and it's kind of the same as you, so two battles before that stuff happens.
So is Armageddon kind of anticlimactic?
Yeah, our faith is like a muscle, and as we exercise it in the little battles, all just like Christ did throughout his life, depending on his Father. So our faith will be strengthened so that when we come to the big one, it will be easier. It's not just getting ready for one big battle, but it's all the little battles along the way.
So faith is a gift that we have to nurture, act upon, because like a muscle, if we don't, it will die. Yes, sir.
Unless you and I get a new heart, and I really need it all day long.
One more time.
Unless I get a new heart, God's spirit is not going to come because God knows my heart. And that is where the challenge for the free battle is all day long.
Well, anybody else? So, and I started the day saying, my faith and your faith is strengthened and nurtured by seeing the faithfulness of God throughout the ages. I read you the prayer earlier. Now we're going to sing the song. We're not going to sing it. Somebody else did.
In my moments of fear, through every pain, every tear, there's a God who's been faithful to me. When my strength was all gone, when my heart had no song, still in love, he's proved faithful to me. Every word he's promised is true. And what I thought was impossible, I've seen my God do. He's been faithful, faithful. I could not pray. Still, my God, He was faithful to me. Oh, the days I spent so selfishly reaching out for what pleased me. Even then, God was faithful to me. Every time I come back to Him, He is waiting with open arms, and I see once again. He's been faithful, faithful to me. Looking back, His love and mercy I see. Although in my heart I have questioned, even to believe that He's been faithful, I have questioned, even to believe that He's been
Thank you.
2 weeks ago, we closed out Sabbath school with the song, Is He Worthy?
Yes.
Thanks for having that at PC, Terry. It was beautiful. Is He worthy? I think the answer is a resounding yes. Why? Because He's been faithful.
Amen.
I wasn't gonna do this, Randall, but let's go ahead and do it since it's on the screen. Let's close out our day with this. Now we, grace and truth, praise and exalt, glorify He. It's right. All His ways are just. And those who walk in pride, He is able to humble. Amen. God bless you. See you next week. Terry does chapter 17.